Hello, friends, and welcome back for Chapter 2 of W. O. Mitchell's The Black Bonspiel. You may recall that in Chapter 1 we met Willie McCrimmon, a cobbler in the small town of Shelby, Alberta. After losing his beloved Presbyterian church, Willie was left with curling as his only religion. We also met Reverend Pringle, the minister of the town's United Church, who was preoccupied with the meddlings of Mrs. Annie Brown in the first chapter. Finally, there was a shadowy figure from the first chapter named O. Clutie, who we find wandering over from the local funeral parlor to Wally's shoe repair shop in chapter 2. The Black Bonspiel of Willie McCrimmon, chapter 2. Behind the long counter that separated the work from the public side of his shoe and harness shop, Willie McCrimmon sat at his last as he mended a boot. Far right on the public side was a pot-bellied Quebec heater with a mica umbilicus. A stovepipe angled and kinked up and across the ceiling and out the side wall. To Willie's left was the shoes and boots to be repaired shelving, on which were jumbled ticketed footwear. The bell over the old door tingled. The devil, aka Old Clutie, entered. Willie looked from his last, laid his hammer down, got up, and walked to the counter. His face had a full, pursed look. With his eyes on the customer, he lifted a hand and spat into a cargo of tacks, then placed them on the counter. Satan, who had laid his paper bundle down, began to open it. "Aye, my curling boots. I would like you to do a resole job on them for me." Willie picked up one of them, turned it over, set it down, and looked at the other one. As he did, Old Clutie stepped over to the Quebec stove, set the coffee pot aside, lifted the round lid aside with a bare hand, then plunged both down and into the flame to subdue the winter chill. Still examining the boots, Willie failed to notice this astonishing hand-baking. Done to a turn, Clutie pulled his hands out, replaced the lid and coffee pot, and returned to the counter. "They need a resole job." "Could see that," Willie said. His attention shifted to the hand splayed on the counter, and he experienced an immediate shock, gentle, yet distinct as the hard kiss of one granite curling rock against another. The stranger's hands were small and almost fleshless, their backs coarse with jet-black, wiry hair growing almost to the base of claw nails. Willie looked up, and the stranger's eyes were on a level with his own. The black brows were rakish, with an upward flare at the outer ends that was matched by the angle of the ears. He pointed to the boots. "Never seen a pair quite like these before. Odd toes to them. Broad, round, not point. Custom made for a true fit. So, resole. And these creases on the upper, they stay. Just the soles. You'll do them for me." "Well, what I'm here for the past 23 years. When would you wish them done?" "My next trip through 2 weeks." "Where do you curl? Glencoe, Calgary?" "No. Can I have them in 2 weeks' time?" Wally shrugged his shoulder and toward the shoes to be repaired shelf. "Behind on me repairs." He picked up the boots and turned them over thoughtfully. "Afraid you'll have to resort to buckled overshoes for 3 weeks." There was a calculated pause as Mr. Clutie looked at Willie. "3 weeks, then. Best I can do." Willie set the boots down again and looked at his visitor. "You're not from around here?" "No. Seen your face before, though." "Quite likely." "Foothills Bonspiel?" "No." "Little Britches Rodeo? Bull show? Craft fair?" "Possibly. I'm a traveling man." Fooled me, Willie said. Figured you were a professional man, more like a university professor. The devil laughed. Very perceptive of you. I do a lot of business in academia. Not familiar with that tune. Politician are you then? I do spend a lot of time in your capitals, provincial and federal. 3 weeks then? I've got it. Bible salesman. Oh, Willie, do you ever hog that rock? He turned away to the door. 3 weeks. As the bell tingled, Willie picked up the tacks from the counter and replaced them in his mouth. He turned away, seated himself at the last, and began the crooked rhythm of his hammer. But shortly he was back to the counter again, staring at the shoes, picking them up. Warmer than I thought they'd be if he'd just taken them off. And he must have carried them a distance through the cold outside air. He moved toward the shoe to be repaired shelf and tossed the boots into the tumbled and ticketed contents. Laborers' felt boots, formless and somehow pathetic children's boots, Matt Stanley's newspaperman's brogues, flat farm boots, ranchers' high-heeled boots, Dr. Fitzgerald's fancy riding boots, all lying there with Mame Harris's disgracefully run-over heels, nudging the bunion bulges of Aunt Lil's sensible English shoes. There was a shocking democracy in his shoes to be repaired shelf, for he had thrown the footgear there with fine and deliberate disregard for their owner's social, economic, and moral position. He moved back to the last. The cobbling hammer took up its impatient, crooked rhythm in the dim stillness, rich with the soft smell of new harness, bitter with the tang of leather dye. Now and again his hammer fell silent as he refilled his mouth with tacks. Took a break, went over with a cup to the coffee pot on the Quebec stove, and as he returned to the last he saw the white card on the counter corner. He picked it up. Mr. O. Clutie, Wholesale Souls, Retail Sins. Business and home address, 1313 Sulphur Boulevard, SS Hell. Hell? Just as he said it, the bell over the door tinkled, and Reverend Pringle entered. Always the warm greeting, Mr. McCrimmon. Reverend. No offence intended. Help yourself to a coffee. Cups by the stove. No thanks, just dropping by. You busy? Some. Willie's hammer tapped twice, and then he took the boot from the last and turned it around. Reaching to the bench for a curved cobbling knife, he grasped the boot to the wishbone and began to pare the edge of the sole. You're not the first. First? Questioned Reverend Pringle. Visitor? Willie answered, looking up. I had your opposition in a while back. The young minister's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Oh. Was Father O'Halloran here to visit? No. What had you in mind, Mr. Pringle? Oh, a moment, just a moment of your time. Called on Mr. Clayton and, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Bowley. Willie laid down the boot and stared hard at Reverend Pringle. All members of your congregation? Yes, they are, Mr. McCrimmon. He cleared his throat. I know you aren't a member of Grace of our church. That's right. Still, I'm calling on you as I did the others, in regard to the new church. Hey! Willie returned to the shoe to the last, replaced the tacks in his mouth, and picked up his cobbling hammer. We hope to break ground on it early this spring, Reverend Pringle said. Do you? Willie said. His hammer began to tap even more vigorously on the sole. When we have managed the necessary funds, the last was quite pointed. Said Willie, around the tacks and above the sound of the hammer on the leather. So far we have done very well, almost better than we expected, and I see one of my finest dreams very near to coming true. the thing I've directed all of my energies toward since coming to Shelby. That and prohibition? Willie said. Yes, in the matter of temperance, I am taking a firm stand. Half rising from his seat, Willie spat out the tacks into his cupped hand and said, The prohibition of Sabbath curling? You managed to get that bylaw through? Oh, yes, yes. There was an awkward pause. I've always felt that there should be one day set aside for the spirit. You could say caroling was as much for the spirit as for the flesh. Well, for contemplation. One day out of 7 for, uh, I suppose we do not see eye to eye on that, Mr. McCrimmon. No, we did not. But you must admit that we did have the approval of the majority of the townspeople. More were against Sunday curling than were. More do not curl than do, Willie countered, or have wives that do not. Not one curler voted for your bylaw prohibiting Sabbath curling. For their own good, Mr. McCrimmon, the minister laid a gentle, persuasive hand on Willie's shoulder. For their own good. Ye can't. Can't what? Ye can't determine for other people what's for their own good. It's a judgment that they must acquire for themselves. Oh, now. Reverend Pringle turned away and leaned against the counter. It often helps to have a little outside help now and again. No harm in stiffening the morale. If it needs outside stiffening, then it is a false morality. Well, he swung around to face Pringle directly. You could patch up from the outside from now till the resurrection, and you would still have a poor thing, Mr. Pringle. Have you tried to work from the inside, Mr. Pringle? We do that, the minister responded, reaching inside his coat. We do that too. Do you know? The Reverend brought from his pocket a piece of paper. Yes, I think we do. He continued gently, smoothing out the paper on the counter. And it's my feeling that when our new church is completed, it will go a long way toward helping with the inside work you speak of. Will it? Willie watched the young minister take a fountain pen from his pocket. Now, I know you are not a member of our congregation, but I would like to put your name down. Reverend Pringle bent over the list. Mr. Pringle? Yes. You are a young man, Mr. Pringle. You must have been a wee boy when it happened. Willie went back to his last, sat down. You are not to have a clear memory of what took place in Shelby? All of Canada, but not south of the border, nor in Scotland, where the Presbyterian Mother Church held firm. You're referring to the union of the Methodist and Presbyterian Church? I'm referring to the loss of my Presbyterian Church. The birth of the United Church. Aye, birth often follows rape. Please, Mr. McCrimmon, I was born a Presbyterian, not Methodist. I still am a Presbyterian, continuing Presbyterian, even though I have no church to worship in. But you're welcome to come and worship with us in Grace United. No, thanks. When it was Grace Presbyterian, that was another thing. But now that it has been turned Methodist, not Methodist, it isn't Methodist, Mr. McCrimmon. United. I was not born, nor was I brought up to be Methodist. Willie brought the cobbling hammer down smartly for emphasis. I do not intend to live Methodist, he banged the hammer again, nor to die Methodist. The hammer came down with a final, clinching bang. Now, just a minute. You've started out with the wrong assumption. I have been given the choice of your Methodist church and... Oh, please, all right. Willie conceded magnanimously. All right. Your United Church, Baptist, the Anglicans, Father O'Halloran, St. Therese, not to mention the meetings of the burning church of Nazareth over the Odd Fellows Hall. I have visited them all since the Union, Reverend Pringle finished, since the loss of my own church. Willie paused. I long ago decided to remain what I am, continuing Presbyterian, with the creed of my fathers and their fathers and their fathers. I cannot go along with modern, but Mr. McCrimmon, everything must change. Willie shook his head slowly and stubbornly. No religion. He walked toward the pot-bellied heater, standing almost center behind the counter. It's the foundation of the spirit, and a foundation cannot shift, cannot change without damage to the structure above. Willie stopped by the wood box, reached up and twisted the damper in the stove. Cannot change, must stand steadfast. Aye, what's a good foundation for my father is a good foundation for me. But your father lived in a different world. Your father believed many things you do not believe in. Willie reached into the wood box before straightening with a chunk of kindling. No, my faith and my convictions are the same as my father's. The same as the day I sat beside him in a church, hearing the minister's voice soaring and dipping grand as he painted for his congregation a picture of the hell that awaited all sinners. I can recall my feet trembling inside my copper-toed boots as I felt the hot breath of hell and smelled the sulphur smell as the sinners roasted over flames everlasting. Willie bent to open the mica-paneled door of the stove. We believe in a religion of love today, Mr. McCrimmon. Aye. Willie threw the words over his shoulder as he squatted before the stove. Aye, of love and no hell. Well, and no devil. Symbolically speaking, agreed Reverend Pringle. I mean actually speaking. Willie rose to his feet and faced Pringle with the wood chunk still in his hand. Hell and the devil, there's the foundations for a religion. The skeletal requirements, you might say, Mr. Pringle. When you begin to preach sermons with bones in them, then you can show me something besides the wishy-washy symbolical hells and symbolical devils. Then Willie McCrimmon will be right alongside the other members of your congregation, taking communion with in your new Methodist church. But it's not Methodist, it's United. Oh, all right, Mr. McCrimmon. Pringle picked up his list, began to fold it. I won't bother to put your name down. Hold on now. Don't be hasty. Half a loaf's better than none. I don't mind. Half a loaf? Pringle stopped his hand from replacing the list in his breast pocket. How much had you mind putting me down for? $20. I see. Willie paused. Church is a church, Methodist or not. But it's $20, an indirect blow. Indirect blow? Will you tell me one thing? Yes. Do you or do you not believe in a devil? Well, I do believe that there is a force for evil abroad in the world. It does not answer my question. Do you believe in a personal devil? Well, no. Do you believe in hell? Pringle, his back to the counter, paused and cleared his throat. Do you believe in a hell? I believe we make a hell for ourselves that... Willie turned away in disgust and took a few steps toward the stove. Do you believe in a three-dimensional, crackling, actually burning hell to which we may or may not go when our time comes, where we may roast? He flipped open the door of the Quebec heater, in whose belly a miniature hell of leaping flames glinted. In blazing fire, from everlasting to everlasting, do you, shrieking and writhing in torment and exquisite pain beyond all human comprehension, while the Lord in his infinite compassion and mercy looks down from the dew-washed heights of heaven above? No, Mr. McCrimmon. Reverend Pringle's face revealed his utter repugnance for this concept of a Heavenly Father and true Christianity. No, I do not. Willie banged home a chunk of the kindling into the flames. Aye, he clanged the door shut. And what would you say, Mr. Pringle, if one day you sat in your study with your King James version of your Bible in one hand your thumb and finger in the concordance, and there came a ring at your doorbell. What would you do if you went to it and found there was a lean, dark gentleman, black brows that turned upward at their outer corners and ears to match? If you saw that he had hoofs, oh now, and he announced himself as the devil come to have a short chat with you between his routine calls in the town of Shelby? I'd say I was having hallucinations, Pringle replied. Then you would be wrong. Now there is where Father O'Halloran and I come a little closer to understanding each other. I remember him explaining to me about a year ago the meaning of a black mass. Black mass? You've heard of it? Willie said. I believe that in more backward countries, ignorant and superstitious people, Willie waved his explanation aside, a ceremony devoted to the worship of the devil, where everything is backwards, robes worn backwards, crucifix upside down, prayers backwards, black mass, superstition. 'Tis an old superstition, then. It's still as old as time, as old as the flesh, as old as Adam, Willie said, sitting down. And you think you'd be having hallucinations if you saw old Clootie? Yes, I certainly. Then you would be wrong. Willie brought his cobbling hammer down smartly on the boot sole. Ah, no, he called on me today. He looked up defiantly. What? In the shop here? Brought me a pair of his curling boots for to mend. That's ridiculous. Oh, no, it's not. Willie jerked his head toward the shoes to be repaired shelf. Lie over there on top of the shoes to be repaired. Mr. Pringle laughed. A devil bringing in a pair of curling boots. Aye, it's a wee bit unusual. Most curlers just use overshoes. You don't find that many custom-made curling boots. Nor devils who curl. What would bring him here? Tells me he's a regular visitor here in Shelby. Back in 3 weeks' time. I knew you were a stubborn man, Mr. McCrimmon. I believe you were old-fashioned in your beliefs, but I never for a moment accused you of being superstitious. But I'm not. Willie rose from his last, walked silently to the cash register at the end of the counter, punched it, and looked up as he put his hand into the opening drawer. Now, $20. Eh? Towards your new Methodist church. If he's a regular visitor to our town, we could use another church. A new church. You may put me down for $20. I'm going to need all the support I can get here. Pringle took the $20 bill slowly and sadly, as shaking his head he turned from the counter and started for the door, knowing that he would never understand the unpredictable heart of the dour Scot. Willie returned to his last, and his cobbling hammer took up its crooked rhythm until the doorbell tinkled to signal the entrance of Annie Brown. She came right to the point. You just had a visitor. Eh, Reverend Pringle? No. Before him. Distinguished gentleman. Ah, yes. I met him out on the street. He knew me by name. Not surprised. Not from Shelby. No. He seemed to know Reverend Pringle, too. They're both in the same business, you might say. I see. Man of the cloth? Not quite, Willie said. Well, is he or isn't he? Both of them are concerned with souls. I don't mean leather ones. There's a nice serious reason you've dropped in, Mrs. Brown. Yes, the curling by-law. You are a moral man, continuing Presbyterian, and you know that he labored 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested, and the 8th commandment says to keep his Sabbath holy, doesn't it? A 6th commandment. Oh, it does seem strange to me that you do not seem to support the by-law to prohibit Sunday curling. I do not consider curling on any day a profaning or corrupting pursuit. Really, Miss Brown, it's none of your business at all. Well, it is, as long as my husband curls lead on your rink. His business, yes. Yours, no. For you do not curl on my rink. Annie's face tightened. She glared for long moments at Willie. Something I'll never, ever understand, how my husband or any others on your rink can stand you. She flounced out. Willie returned to his last, but his mind was not on his work. He laid aside his hammer and went over to the shoes to be repaired shelf. He picked out the devil's curling boots. Still warm. Ah, well, he sighed. Boot's a boot and all that. This concludes chapter 2 of the Black Bonspiel of Willie McCrimmon. In keeping with, just highlighting some of the most interesting parts of it, I think the best part of this chapter has to be the theological debate between Reverend Pringle, who is a representative of the United Church of Canada, and Willie McCrimmon himself, who represents the old Presbyterian, roots. The two churches were unified in the 1920s around this time, but there was a large number of people who continued to be Presbyterian who thought it was just horrible that they were throwing off their religion by embracing this new Methodist religion of love, because Presbyterian is, as Willie described it, a much darker faith. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and you can take some time with your family to decide which vision of heaven and hell you picture. Is there a devil really out there? Is there a real, actual hell, as Willie would have it? While you're thinking about that, be sure to tune in tomorrow for Chapter 3, where we're going to learn 3 things. First, we'll get to meet a couple of the members of Willie's rink. Second, we'll learn about Willie's greatest dream, which is a fairly topical one for today. And then finally, we'll get to learn just the nature of the Faustian bargain that the devil has in store for William McCrimmon.